Translated with DeepL.com. Source:
Neue lebenswichtige Informationen.
PDF: New, vital information about the coronavirus and other interesting news.
731st Contact Monday, 3rd of February 2020, 21.58h.
Edward, dear friend, greetings.
Well, dear friend, you too, be greeted and welcome. As we have discussed, you are going to talk about the corona disease today, which is more than just our normal conversations. But I would like to say that it would be good if you could explain everything in simple words, so that I and all those who will read our conversation later, when I have called it up and written it down, can understand everything correctly as medical laymen.
You are not as amateurish as you act, my friend, as others will not be either, but you will be right nevertheless, for the majority of those who read the notes of the conversation will probably not have any medical education, so I will choose my explanations in a linguistic way that everything will be understood by them. Then I will begin in a simple explanatory way as follows.
1.
Our research unit, which has been working intensively since last year in late summer on the beginning of the SARS epidemic, which is very far-reaching and will now spread throughout the world as the corona epidemic pandemic, has so far produced alarming findings. This includes the fact that the highest responsible persons of all states, as authorities of the peoples, are incapable of correctly assessing the epidemic, which has been spreading strongly for some time and is already spreading globally, with a few exceptions, which cannot, however, penetrate their opinions. The people's superiors are also incapable of identifying, instructing and implementing the right protective measures, which is to be blamed on the pandemic that has already started, but this will be denied and trivialized by them, as is customary among them, in order to evade their responsibility, as is the case with all arrogant earthly state authorities.
2.
Our experts have ascertained that this epidemic, of which you have spoken several times already some time ago and which is also recorded in written reports of conversations, will spread rapidly in the near future and intensify in its dangerous and deadly nature and consequently claim a great many lives.
3. The danger and lethality of this insidious epidemic results from a mutation, whereby changes and from it new gene variations of the virus develop, which become more dangerous and more aggressive. 4.
Due to the changing danger of the coronavirus, in the next few weeks the first to be infected will be older people, but also people who are already ill, which will also lead to high mortality rates. For the time being, therefore, younger people, especially adolescents and children, are even less susceptible to the coronavirus. However, the automatic transformation of the virus will result in new genetic variations that will become more dangerous and aggressive, and will therefore spread to younger people, infecting them and causing them to suffer.
A.
Furthermore, in the near future it will be revealed that a large number of people will be infected and die on a global scale, who have negatively altered immune systems as a result of harmful blood mixtures between members of different tribes, of which terrestrial immunologists, physicians and virologists etc. have no idea. I would like to explain this to those people who will read the notes of the conversation and who have no knowledge of what the immune system is in the field of immunology. According to the teachings of immunology or immunobiology, the immune system is described as the basis of the body's defense against pathogens of a biological and biochemical nature. Basically, the immune system corresponds to a factor of organic self-defense in the form of a defense against foreign substances attacking and penetrating the human organism, including other living organisms, such as biological toxins and environmental toxins as well as bacteria, microbes, fungi, parasites, viruses and other pathogens. All of these cause malfunctions and disorders in the body, whereas the immune system uses defense mechanisms to fight the attacking foreign bodies etc. The teaching of immunology or immunobiology and thus of the immune system corresponds as a research subject to a subdiscipline of biology, namely a system of cellular and molecular processes that enable the recognition of various pathogens and foreign substances and their inactivation. The processes of this kind are to be understood as immune responses, whereby, due to its central role in relation to the human immune system, immunology and medicine is very important for understanding a large number of diseases. Prevention and preventive measures are of paramount importance, whereby these are always aimed at reducing risks or mitigating or completely preventing harmful consequences of any kind that are harmful to health and can cause disasters or other undesirable situations. Immunology has various branches, whereby immunochemistry is used to study the structure of antigens, antibodies and the chemical basis of immune reactions. Immunogenetics investigates the genetic variability of immune reactions and the mechanisms of generation of antigen-presenting relationship regions of antibodies of thymic cell receptors, or T lymphocytes, which correspond to a group of white blood cells that serve the immune defense. These thymic lymphocytes U-circumflex in the thymus. The cells mature U-circumflex together with the B lymphocytes represent the adaptive or acquired immune response, respectively the response of the immune system. Finally, there is immunopathology and clinical immunology, which investigate disorders of the immune system, such as allergies, which occur in autoimmune diseases and in the formation of tumors, etc.
All well and good, dear friend, your explanations are well and good, but I suppose that your explanations are probably not understandable for laymen, even if you have explained them in an understandable way. But I don't think that further explanations are necessary, because only a few earthlings would be interested, at least not those who don't have enough groats in their heads to even want to think about the whole thing. Hence they are being straw dumb.
This is doubly stupid, because everything concerning this is of great importance for the preservation of health.
I know that, but you can't force someone to turn to intellect and rationality if they don't want to do it themselves. The basic fact is that the majority of earthlings are not willing to be told anything and do not accept any truths, so good, correct and important advice is thrown to the wind. If something is said, then it will probably be heard, but what is said will not be listened to.
Unfortunately, this is true, because the majority of people on earth are so focused on themselves, their personal well-being and personal profit, as well as on all possible personal advantages and above all on a confused and crazy belief in God that on the one hand, every personal logical thinking is effectively stifled, as you always say, but on the other hand, the grasping, formation and use of understanding and reason is impossible. Now however, I want to point out the further necessary things that still have to be said.
B. Atmospheric and climate-related factors also contribute to infection by the coronavirus, as does airborne transmission. Although this does not mean that the air or atmosphere is impregnated with the pathogen, but that it is only transmitted from person to person through the air if the distance between them is too small. It is therefore important that in every relationship, and especially in a conversation or communication, between one person and another person, a sufficiently large distance of about 1.50 to 2 meters is maintained, because breathing and speaking expels breath and expiratory droplets that float through the air and, if the distance between the two is insufficient, are inhaled by people opposite and thus infect them. C.
Exhalation droplets are not only inhaled by people facing each other when the distance between them is too small, but they also settle on all kinds of body parts, especially on the face and hands, but also on clothing, on open meat of all kinds, which means on open cut meat and open or cut fruits and vegetables. Because the pathogen U circumflex various other pathogens U circumflex can easily settle on moist surfaces, persist for some time and be contagious. Uninjured and uncut fruits and vegetables, on the other hand, can be washed and eaten well. This while dead objects and materials of all kinds in a completely dry state offer little or no possibility of deposit, but may only be soaked in water.
D.
A further factor for coronavirus infection is that all genera and species of mammalian organisms are susceptible to this virus and may be affected by it. In particular, pets such as dogs and cats may contribute to the spread of the disease, as may all other mammals such as cattle, horses and pigs and rodents, etc.
E.
The treatment of persons infected with corona disease requires that doctors and nurses wear only fully protective clothing when carrying out their work, in such a way that such clothing must be changed for the next person infected and to be treated. This is because the protective clothing is contaminated and infectious by the damp exhalation or expiratory droplets of infected patients, and the virus inevitably spreads to other people, not only to patients, but also to the medical and nursing profession.
5.
Our foresight findings indicate that corona infections will continue to increase worldwide and that a new phase of growth is already underway, which will continue to spread in waves around the world in the coming months, claiming many victims and leaving no country unaffected.
6.
The unreasonableness of the people on earth, especially of the leaders, will lead to the fact that compatriots in other countries will be brought back home, whereby persons infected by the disease will spread the virus additionally and very quickly in practically all countries. As a result, in countries where the disease is being reduced, it will be rekindled by new introductions and spread again.
7.
The unreasonableness of the majority of the population, which does not change its incorrect behavior and will not comply with the issued regulations regarding protective measures, is also responsible for the steady increase in infections and deaths, but also because all the measures ordered by the authorities are careless and extremely inadequate. This is also because most of those in positions of responsibility in government leadership are incapable of foresight and are completely naive about the danger and effects of the coronavirus, which changes genetically within itself, as is also the case with virology specialists.
8.
Since the SARS epidemic, research on the SARS virus has been carried out by virologists, etc., which has provided some valuable information, but is being approached too slowly. Consequently, it is not recognized that this valuable research and its results have produced valuable substances that could be developed and used against the mutated coronavirus, which independently changes into new gene variations in a relatively short time.
9.
On the one hand, irrationality and incompetence prevail among state leaders, state administrations, state managers and authorities, who are incapable of their positions and are neither able to think ahead nor to foresee the consequences, as is also the case with the population. All of them are incapable of assessing threatening events and situations that may arise unexpectedly, and therefore incapable of ordering and implementing the necessary measures and of bringing the population under control. As a result, the state authorities and all their subgroups up to the local authorities and security forces etc. are hardly or not at all able to enforce the necessary measures before a catastrophe occurs, as it is now becoming with the corona pandemic, which started much earlier and caused deaths and was already taken abroad before the epidemic was recognized and only laxly dealt with on December 8, 2010.
10.
The long-running changes in the virus, which are still occurring now and will continue to occur in the future, will not be recognized by earthly researchers for some time to come, which will lead to many more infections and deaths.
11.
Different peoples have different symptoms in relation to fever, cough and sniffles, as well as other characteristics of the epidemic, of which there are others, so that some will suffer more from one form of symptoms and others from another. In this respect, given the different populations and social classes, there are also different forms of symptoms and negative immunological susceptibilities, especially since there is no uniform immune system in the entire population of the Earth, but rather each population and class of population shows marked deviations from the norm, which is the reason why the risk of infection is higher or lower, as the case may be. This fact, however, is still unknown to the terrestrial doctors, medical doctors, researchers, virologists and immunologists, etc. However many other factors they will have to fathom for many years to come.
12.
The various immune systems and biological defenses of the various peoples on Earth, of terrestrial human beings, as well as of all higher beings, prevent the damage of tissues and organs by pathogenic agents, but in this respect, and with regard to health behavior, etc., health professionals provide little or no information or instruction to the population, as would be necessary. In this regard, the leaders and authorities would also be called upon to take and implement the necessary steps and actions nationwide to educate the populations, which would also teach them how to behave in order to avoid great evils when an epidemic or other disaster strikes.
13.
The above-mentioned fact of the differences in the immune systems among the people of the Earth or their peoples, groups, clans, genders and mixtures of people is not known to the earthly physicians. These differences, however, must be taken into special consideration because they are very important, because they are not only atmospheric, climatic and territorial, but also depend on social behavioral factors, etc. Therefore, in various countries they contribute particularly strongly to corona disease infection and death. The atmospheric and climatic influences on the immune system in certain countries lead to particular viral gene alterations, which also result in different moments of infection, so that the ongoing viral gene-related changes also show different symptoms in corona disease. However, there is some explanation for this, also with regard to the pure genus, the diversity of species and the mixing of peoples, because these take on a special value with regard to the resistance of the immune systems of terrestrial human beings, which are weakened or strengthened depending on the circumstances.
14.
Humanity on Earth is made up of a single race and not, as is generally believed, of several races. The terrestrial humanity thus corresponds worldwide to a single genus, which is designated as human, but which is divided into various species and which derive organically and structurally from each other, as well as in all species spread worldwide, which correspond to the genus Almedam or human being. This means that they are classified as a derivative or basic substance and thus as a parent compound, which is chemically and organically identical. This parent compound and its derivatives are structurally linked to each other, as the definition makes clear. In this respect, organic chemistry results in a substance which, because it has a structural unit, corresponds to a functional group of a parent compound and also contains a structural element of this functional group in the same oxidation state. If the functional group of the parent 5 compound is considered, then a new functional group is found in the derivative as a species, but it contains a structural element of the functional group of the parent compound in the same oxidation state, NW.
Sorry to interrupt, but this chemical stuff is probably not suitable to be understood by laymen. I'm also not very well educated in these things, and although I can understand where the whole thing is supposed to lead from, my intelligence is not sufficient to be able to exactly define the whole process and put it together.
That was not the purpose of my attempt at explanation. Unfortunately, I fell into my acquired knowledge and did not think about the fact that I have to give an explanation that is understandable for a layman.
All right, it was not an accusation, but only an interjection to make you aware that you have lapsed into shop talk for us laymen, which would probably have ultimately lapsed into a form of human breeding and human monoculture. At least I assume so, because you spoke of a pure species, of a diversity of species and of a mixture of peoples, whereby I actually understand by your term pure species pure breed or racial purity. In this respect, I learned from your father's Firth that a pure breed as such has both advantages and disadvantages in terms of susceptibility or immunity to disease. According to my understanding, as I learned from Sfirth early in my life, and if I may call the pure kind as you call it and call it that, they can generally have a good and stronger constitution as well as a less good one. And this is so related to physical, mental and consciousness-based health, as well as to the fact that earthlings can be stupid or intelligent beasts. I have also learned and experienced this in my life in my dealings with people of many pure types. So these facts are known to me and for me experienced facts, which I often simply observe, but from which I could learn a lot about the earthlings. But for me there is no reason to believe that the negative aspect of the whole would be limited to the rank and file and thus to the majority of the earthlings, because my observations I have made mostly with academics and doctoral candidates as well as with various large and well-known government figures, up to presidents, dictators and even the Emperor of Persia. And it is precisely among these of all people that I have found a number of character, action, intellect, rationality and behavioral deficits, which were much less or not at all present in the majority of the pedestrian population. Well, I also know that a monopopulation or a pure genus of a people can be harmful, if there is no mixing with foreign immigrants and therefore no new blood is added, because the old blood and the immune system of a people is leached out, so to speak, and thus people become more susceptible to disease and consequently less resistant to pests and malignant, bad and poisonous environmental influences. If, however, within an appropriate and controlled framework, a blood mixture etc. and a mixture of peoples is created, so to speak an indispensable mixed culture, then this results in either a higher and better or, on the contrary, a lower and worse resistance, depending on the case. And this fact can be observed and recognized worldwide in all peoples, and this principle can be recognized and found not only in the people of the earth, but in all living beings, because the transfer from one form of life to another has positive or negative effects in any case. So also with regard to the earth human species. As I already learned from Sfirth as a young man, and that on visits which led me to various peoples worldwide, where I had the opportunity to learn these facts through his help and the time travels, as I did later during my own wanderings through the world, the pure genus is not good, even from the ground up. As I have noticed, a justified, controlled and targeted blood refreshment or mixing between members of different peoples results in many valuable and positive, development advancing innovations and evolutionary value complexes. This, while from wild, unjustified and uncontrolled machinations and processes of this kind develop development inhibiting or development disrupting and even development destroying factors, from which discord, hatred and all evil arise. And exactly this, in my opinion, is the reason why blood replenishments between peoples and thus mixtures of peoples should only take place in a controlled framework, but not mass immigration caused by globalization or by floods of refugees who flood foreign countries as a result of wars, hunger, unemployment and terrorism, and bring about blood mixtures with the natives indiscriminately and aimlessly. intentionally or by force. Strictly speaking, I see all peoples with all their cultures as a special and gigantic organism that is constantly growing and developing, but each organism is different from every other. And if this were not so, then the whole world would look very bad and sink into monotony, because if all human beings and their cultures were of the same kind, then no further development would take place, because all humanity would become incapable of such a development and would wither away as a result of the factor pureness. This is precisely because in this pureness or racial purity there would be no mixing of blood or renewal of blood, and there would be atrophy of various forms, even to the point of extinction of peoples, as has already occurred in earlier times, and thus various peoples have become extinct. So, in order to preserve the peoples, and all of humanity in general, it is necessary that there should be controlled mixing between members of the various peoples in order to refresh the blood among themselves and thus counteract a monopopulation or a pure species or racial purity. And this is necessary because each people as a whole as well as each individual must develop further. And for this purpose the renewal of the blood or the mixing between the peoples is also necessary. But if this does not happen, then there is nothing that can be supplemented and combined, because only a supplementing and merging of different factors that fit together can create something new and produce something lasting, and it is exactly every newly created stable thing that is an important factor for further development and stability. And this also relates to the continued existence of the earthling in its entirety and in all its diversity. It is therefore completely mistaken to believe that a people must be biologically and culturally purebred, because when this delusion arises, then a degenerative catastrophe is pre-programmed, as human history has proven since time immemorial and right up to the present day. When in the delusion of purebredness the world has always been overrun with war, murder, plunder and destruction, as it also happened from 1939 to 1945 by the Nazi regime, but what is still happening today worldwide, for example through terrorist organizations of all kinds, fanatical religious states and the like. In fact, humanity on Earth must stop believing itself to be purebred and identifying itself as such, because in truth there is not a single people on Earth that is effectively purebred, because from time immemorial there has been undeniable blood mixing between peoples, which has led to the development of new species, which is still the case today. This simply had to be said.
And it has been well explained. And moreover, you have anticipated all the necessary explanations in an understandable and simple way, which I wanted to bring forward in this regard, but now I want to elaborate on the other explanations that I had started.
15.
A spread of the epidemic can occur within seconds, or rather after the moment of infection, not when it becomes detectable and acute. Wearing protective masks against pathogens only makes sense if they are used sensibly, but this cannot be the case if they are worn during the day on the street and in buildings, instead of in crowds and in the near or narrow area of people affected by the disease. On the one hand, they are basically useless in this way without protective goggles, because even masks available in the public domain are only of any use if they are thick and tight enough to prevent the exhalation of breath and the spread of expiratory droplets, and if they cannot be absorbed and inhaled by the outside world or other people. Ordinary face masks, however, are of no use in this respect, because they are usually not suitable for a protective function against bacteria and viruses and normally only against dust, sand and pollen and the like. The only appropriate masks are special filter masks and special medical masks. So, protective masks should be equipped for a specific purpose, but should only be used if an effective sense is associated with it. But if this is not a necessity and protective masks are worn nevertheless, then this is not only nonsensical, but also ridiculous and resembles a carnival fuss.
16.
The incubation period, or the time between infection and the outbreak and emergence of the corona disease, corresponds to the time between infection with the pathogen and the appearance of the first symptoms. The incubation period of this disease is insidious and cannot simply be set at 14 days, as is erroneously claimed by unqualified medical professionals or virologists, etc. According to our initial research, clarifications and findings, the incubation period can be up to 1 month or even 3 months, depending on the case, as well as from a few hours to a few years, depending on the type and condition of the immune system.
17.
Our observations and findings also show that the second genetically modified coronavirus in the human organism behaves very aggressively to lethally, depending on the corresponding immune status, but on the other hand also restrainedly, whereby a recovery is formed, although this does not correspond to a complete destruction of the virus. Our findings show that certain genetic variants do not die, but remain latently present, even during recovery, but are not immediately recognizable and not detectable, as is the case with various other diseases. In the case of this insidious corona disease, however, it can happen unexpectedly some years or decades later, for example, through intimate contact, that the latent, dormant evil can be transmitted. However, this fact cannot be grasped by terrestrial research with medical and virological apparatus and other technology, because according to our predictions, the instruments required for this cannot yet be developed and constructed in the current third millennium. Although people on Earth think that they have a highly developed technology with very high technical values at their disposal, but what is the truth is that the entire earthly technology of any kind is no more than a first step out of deep darkness into a faint glimmer of a still very distant light.
18.
To conclude my remarks, it should be said that, according to our investigations, in all countries of the world there are completely inadequate laws on epidemics and diseases, as well as a complete lack of understanding of how and when an epidemic or pandemic must be effectively countered in order to prevent it.
Your father Sfirth already explained that to me. But all the things you have explained and explained now are probably being thrown to the wind again by various so-called experts with and without academic titles, such as doctors, biologists, chemists, immunologists and virologists etc., as well as by the majority of people who, as usual, want to know everything better. Moreover, as is always the case when something special happens, all the superstitious of all kinds, starting with the highest rulers and going down to the foot of the majority of humanity, come to make their pseudo-declarations public and thus make themselves great and important. The banalities, pseudo-knowledge, pseudo-intelligence and utter nonsense they babble about. Particularly pitiful are the supreme rulers who make themselves incredibly important, but who in truth neither understand anything of the whole of what they are talking nonsense about, nor are they effectively far-sighted, and as a result they also order measures that are not logical, nor are they able to carry out such measures and cannot enforce them. And this is effectively the case worldwide, unfortunately also here in Switzerland, where I see only one person in the federal parliament whom I do not have to count among the failures and to whom I can pay my respects, which I have done and received a handwritten estimate for it.
I am aware of all this, and the fuss they make about their pseudo-wisdom in making public statements to the media such as newspapers, journals, lectures, radio and television, etc., is embarrassing and ridiculous.
How right you are, my friend. But I think that we should get away from this subject and talk about something else, like I've been getting UFO reports lately by phone, email, and also in writing from all over the world, about some strange flying objects being observed for up to 15 or 20 minutes, flying by like a long chain high up in the sky, flying by one after the other, completely silently. Some allow me to publish these sighting reports, while others observers, men and women, wish me to keep quiet about it and not to disclose their reports or names. Obviously it is about those unknown flying objects, which we have talked about together several times, because they also have these UFO phenomena or UFO activities in your focus, and you have told me various things about them. Also with regard to what the reason for the whole of these UFO operations actually is, or what the background for it is and what is intended by it.
I also told you to keep silent about it and not to give any explanations about it when you are asked about it.
I'm sticking to that, Ptaah, because I'm not passing on the word of what you've explained to me or what you've just found out about the origin of these flying objects, which for the Earthlings are UFOs. I am also silent with regard to your explanations about the tasks, efforts and purposes of the crews of these UFOs and their increased flights etc., which you have found out with your much higher technical possibilities than those of the crews and fellow satellites and the whole large group. What I have answered in each case was only related to the fact that these flying objects do not belong to you pledgers and do not correspond in any way to your pledgeric techniques, which according to your information are still very poorly developed compared to ours, despite their higher technology. Consequently, as you explain again and again, this foreign grouping with its UFOs is also not in a position and therefore not able to locate you pledgers, your presence and your ships of radiation, just as they also do not perceive them despite their higher technique and therefore cannot determine that they are observed, investigated and x-rayed by you in your secret machinations. And I can fully understand that you can only tell me this knowledge in confidence and obliged to silence, because.
Exactly, because.
And I'm sticking to that.
734th Sunday, 22nd of March 2020, 23.38h.
There you are, and welcome to. Hello.
Greetings. It is a pleasure.
Excuse me, Floina, greetings too. Whenever you come here together, I don't know which of you two I come first.
That is not important, otherwise we would have to do all three at the same time. And that would be a bit awkward. But as often as we come to you, it is always something special for us. So I also greet you, dear father friend.
We are here because Ptaah has been called away and cannot come here himself, but something important has to be explained, but it will explain Florina.
Then it must be important, right?
Yes, there is some unpleasant information that Ptaah has asked me to explain to you, which is the following: the prevailing situation of the corona pandemic is steadily degenerating and is now affecting Switzerland in a way that requires special caution and measures for you to take, implement and adhere to.
1.
The danger and lethality of the disease results from a mutation and resulting changes, which create new genetic variations of the virus, which have already become much more dangerous and aggressive, and consequently there is an increased and unpredictable possibility of infection, and the whole thing is spreading, including in Switzerland, as I have already mentioned.
2.
The corona epidemic will soon be spreading not only around the world but also in Switzerland, causing a dangerous increase in infections and mortality rates, and Ptaah declares that all persons living in the centre should be required not to leave the centre.
3.
Persons in the centre who have to carry out their daily activities at external workplaces should be required to take a leave of absence or be dispensed from work for at least 14 days. But rather until the time of 20 April, which is absolutely necessary. After this time off, a decision must be made for the following weeks according to the existing situation as to which behavior will continue to be necessary and what must be done in accordance with good sense.
4.
All persons in the center should from now on not leave the center during the time until April 20th at the earliest and should not be subject to arrest, because this alone can offer a certain security for their health. Exceptions should only be considered for unavoidable visits to the doctor, as well as for Eva and Barbara, who have to care for their mothers, but must be careful to avoid other contacts of any kind, even with their own family members living outside the center.
5.
All association activities such as lectures, passive annual general meeting, KGGV, visitor reception, kitchen correction work and passive member compulsory work are to be omitted during the entire period of arrest. Voluntary outside work for the forest, garden and other activities of KG and PG members can be carried out if the workers remain alone. Do not enter the center building and keep the appropriate distance of at least 2 meters from the center residents in order to avoid physical contact and contamination by breath or expiration.
6.
During the detention period, no food purchases or any other external errands should be made. According to Ptaah, as a result of Billy's precautions, sufficient food and emergency supplies are stored in the center to ensure that even a longer period of detention can be easily bridged. For fresh vegetables, fresh fruit and other necessities, home delivery services can necessarily be used, but contact with persons delivering necessary goods must be avoided.
7.
What Ptaah strictly recommends for all persons in the center should also apply to all KG and PG members living outside the center, in Switzerland and in all other countries, so that they all set up, behave and protect themselves in the best possible way in the manner mentioned above and protect themselves from infection of the corona disease. These, my dear friend, are the recommendations that Ptaah gives and which must be followed because they correspond to an urgent need for protective measures to be taken. It has been my duty as instructed by Ptaah, Billy. Thank you, Floina. We will try to follow Ptaah's recommendations. Thank him, please, for his advice.
Following them is really a matter of urgency because, as we know, the precautions and measures imposed by government regulations are completely irresponsible, both in Switzerland and in all other countries around the world.
That is indeed the case, because as we know from our investigations and observations and by looking ahead, the majority of all governments from the highest to the lowest levels of authority are incapable of being sufficiently far-sighted and responsible to understand the whole pandemic, and are also incapable of taking the necessary measures. The majority of peoples are also dawdling away to the same extent, causing mass infection and thus mass death, and from now on not only the death of older people, because this level has been exceeded by changes in the virus and new gene variations have emerged, which now also affect younger people down to newborn babies and are fatal.
That, I think, was to be expected, because neither reason nor reason can be used with all the incorrigible. The bottomless stupidity and irresponsibility of the vast majority of earthlings, of those in government and authority, and of the population, where the minority who use reason and reason have no chance to express their opinions and act, inevitably had to lead to the pandemic being able to develop and degenerate in the first place, and now, according to your explanations, it is beginning to spread even further and higher, here in Switzerland too.
That is indeed the case, but if you allow me, we both still have some questions that relate to the teaching. If your time allows.
Why my time? Surely it is about your time, isn't it?
Yes, it is, but.
I thought so. Then please don't let me stop you and shoot.